Deepa and James, thank you ever so much for joining me this morning. It's another one of the Piscari Insights episodes, and yeah, absolutely delighted to have you with us. So thank you for joining, it's very kind.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Pleasure. So I think let's kind of start off with just kind of both of you, probably individually, who are you, what are your backgrounds, and a brief bit about kind of what you do.
I'm Deepa. I've spent most of my career across agencies within Omnicom and Publicis networks. A year ago, I decided to set up my own fractional CFO consultancy, which I've been doing for a year now. And then 2 months ago, I decided to set up another business with James, who's been a mentor of mine ever since our Publicis days together. And we now have a business called Sherper Group, which is a pre-M&A advisory.
James.
Yeah. Hi, I'm James. So a bit similar to Deepa, I've had too many years in let's call it marcoms to count. Largely within sort of senior CFO, CMO roles. Worked across most of the large networks, and also within independents and private equity-backed businesses. And so I did the sale of Karmarama to Accenture back in a day.
Yeah,
so I was involved in that. And then spent some time at Accenture on the post acquisition journey. So, like Deepa, my background is largely marcoms. For the last 15 months or so, I've been on a similar journey to Deepa, but in a less structured way, I would say. So I've been doing sort of consulting and advisory work for people that have approached me, and usually it's been around sort of board level advisory, so things like exit planning, exit strategies. Helping businesses to think about getting ready. So Deepa said, we've known each other since Publicis days, where I was the UK Group CFO and Deepa was CFO for Sapient in the UK. And we got on really well then. And then when we were both on our kind of journeys post Publicis, we stayed in touch. We've both been involved, on buy side and sell side. And it's incredibly exciting, for businesses when you're in it. But actually having somebody that is independent and objective and can say, well, okay, I understand where you want to go, but there's many different ways of getting there. And actually what's the best route for you to take is really, kind of a useful tool for businesses. And that's what we're trying to provide through Sherper Group.
Yeah, and I think, based on my experience of kind of, on the buy side, on the smaller scale and on the sell side, again, much smaller scale, but the principles are the same, is you meet the corporate finance houses who are excellent at what they do, but it's transaction based. And some of them now are trying to offer the kind of transaction advice, but it's not their core competence. They come from excellence at being transaction people. And the journey before that, the kind of 2 to 3 years before, entrepreneurs, I always think you may go through that journey once, possibly twice, whereas you see it all the time. And therefore you bring an awful lot more value. And given you've worked with the networks and the networks are buying smaller agencies, you come with a pretty unique perspective, I think, of you've worked on the buy side at some scale. And that gives sellers now a great insight into how do buyers work and how does the earn-out work, which we'll come on to later, I think, as part of the discussion. So, the next kind of big question. So, if you looked at your kind of like the key lessons learned ahead of even thinking about an exit or transaction for an agency owner, just individually, kind of like, maybe like Deepa first and then James, what would you say are the lessons learned in advance of even thinking about it?
I think thinking about the team, thinking about leadership, thinking about succession planning is a really interesting one. I think a lot of founders especially haven't really thought that far ahead, if they're looking to exit in 3 to 5 years' time, what does that succession plan look like? Who are the next leaders if they were to exit the business post acquisition? And that's something that buyers look to. Having a strong succession plan is something that's key, I think.
Definitely.
I don't know if James, you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Deepa is absolutely right. That's kind of all the really sort of good, hygiene factors. But I think there's even a stage before, which is making sure everybody's aligned on what the ambition and the vision is. So sometimes when you're just dealing with a single founder owner, it can be much clearer because they've got a clear idea, or they've got a clear idea of the things they want to look at. but often you're dealing with, multiple stakeholders, and that can be an exec team, exec shareholders, and non-exec shareholders. And actually, even within an exec team, you're going to go, yeah, we've all agreed we want to sell the business. Excuse me, and you're going to go, okay, that's great. So how much do you want to sell for? And then you get 3 different valuations, and then you get, yeah, and I want to do it in 1 year, and I want to do it in 3 years, and I want to be around post journey, and so it's, coming up with a plan. You can't really come up with a plan until you've got alignment on what's the ambition, what's the vision, and what's the journey that people want to go on. So, we do work with businesses on that, and actually, obviously, it's easier when everybody's aligned. But it's funny how people think they're aligned, and then you go in and you have that conversation, and you suddenly think,
absolutely,
there's things to work through, and I think the reason why that's important is because, there's a stat that gets bandied around that it's not, specific to our sector, but at least 50% of deals fail, and they fail for many reasons, and some of that's about the transaction and the deal, but a lot of it's about things like cultural fit, and is this the right business? Is it going to help you fulfill your ambitions? And so actually, everybody being aligned on that from the very start becomes so much easier when you're assessing approaches, when you're trying to work out who your buyer set is, when you're trying to work out what's the right deal structure, what's the right valuation. You don't want to be getting halfway through it and then go, actually, I'd quite like to take cash. I'd like to, so.
Exactly. I mean, so, kind of interesting point about, as kind of we had this discussion about if you were an agency doing, say, 2 million of kind of NFI. I mean, very interesting that if I look at the agency kind of friends, clients I've got and network contacts, in my old consulting days, we had a very simple model. I was ex-KPMG, and you'd have this kind of third model. So, off the revenue, you'd expect a third to go into kind of like the direct cost delivery, a third to go into overheads, and therefore left you with a third of profit. But they were a massive global firm. If I look at the agency world, those margins don't seem to be there. So what's happening? I mean, we didn't prepare this, so feel free to say, Mike, I'm not going to cover it, but it'd be good just to get your experiences on, the fundamental driving EBITDA performance, getting to 20% plus EBITDA. A lot of agencies seem to struggle in that below kind of 5 million revenue to get to that level. Any insights into why?
Shall I go?
Yeah, Deepa, yeah.
I obviously have been working with so many agencies over the last year, and a lot of them are actually performing above that level. I think the ones that have struggled are the ones that have ended up, being acquired, if anything. Right. And I think, and this is where I think that post-acquisition planning is so important. What does the growth of that business look like once you've joined somebody else, whether that's a merger, whether that's an acquisition? And I think there's not enough in that planning stage. And that's where I've seen the margins really dip. I think independent agencies, a lot of them, particularly after they hit that sort of 3 million or 5 million mark, are really performing quite well, and we're seeing really good margins from them. And I think they have the power to be able to make decisions a lot faster as well.
Yep.
So I think they're in a really, really strong footing. I mean, that's what I've seen over the last year, and that, from my experience, I would say that independents are in a really, really good, strong position at the moment, particularly those that have been around sort of like, from even the startups up to about sort of the last 5 years or so are doing particularly well.
That's really interesting and encouraging as well. James, what's your kind of experience?
Yeah, I'd agree with Deepa. I think there are a lot of independent agencies performing strongly at a margin level because they are more adaptable and more flexible than bigger agencies and bigger businesses. I do think there are also businesses that don't have strong margin because effectively they've invested. So they're gone through that startup, scale up, and they might be at 4 million with very low margin. But really the opportunity then is to scale, and they've got the fixed cost base in place for them to actually go, we're in a position to take off. It's harder for them to take off on their own, so they're looking for a partner that can accelerate the takeoff. And actually, that's kind of the play for both sides, really, which is we've gone through the pain of setting up. Actually, let's both enjoy the benefit of accelerating.
Interesting. And another question about, again, I love doing this because the beauty comes, the insights come into things we don't prepare, but where your mind takes you. What about eating something your same size? What's your experience of an agency going, we're at 3 million of net fee income, we want to get to 6 or 10, why don't we buy something that's also 3 million of net fee income, merge it together, and then we'll be 6, and then it's only 6 to 10 is the journey. What's your experience of that journey? James first, and then Deepa.
I think it's a great question. I think it's a really interesting question. I think not enough agencies or not enough businesses consider that. I think they're always looking for the big buy or the big sell, so the one event that's going to get them to the outcome, as opposed to seeing it as a journey with a series of events. The only thing I would say is, in my experience, a merger is never really a true merger of equals. There's always,
I would agree,
one party that's for whatever reason, the more dominant partner, but that can be fine if both sides are accepting of that. And it's really about, look, if I can get to the outcome quicker by partnering with somebody, and that can be a merger. It could actually even just be a JV. It could be some sort of commercial partnership. So it's actually about going, look, the reality is we're stronger together. Whatever vehicle we use, whatever structure we take, we're stronger together, and we'll both end up in a better place and get to our ambition quicker.
Even though individually, they might have less of an equity stake in the bigger combined entity, but they'll get there quicker, they'll get there stronger, and they'll get there with a premium, because there's this flip point I see where the EBITDA multiple changes above a certain level, and so you benefit from that kind of EBITDA kind of arbitrage effectively. So Deepa, what's your view? Sorry, James, go on.
Sorry, guys. And that, you see that that's a very PE model, which is, we aggregate, and actually, at some stage, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, 1 + 1 = 3, because it's the aggregation has a real value beyond just simply adding up the numbers.
I mean, interesting, James, that I guess I used to work in PE quite a lot. So I worked on the advisory side in portfolio companies that were private equity backed. And that's where I kind of picked up that model from. It was like, and it's not rocket science, as you say, but it's valuable. It creates true shareholder value, potentially quite quickly. Deepa, what's your thoughts on it?
I don't think I've got much to add from what James has said, but I think there can be strength in numbers. And getting to that stage much faster, it is definitely another route to doing that.
Very good. So next question, which is the prepared one, which is kind of what does the future hold for agencies looking to acquire and or exit in the next 2 to 3 years? What should they be doing to help prepare themselves for that kind of scenario? And to your point, both of you said, don't think about the transaction, think about what happens between now and a point in time where there's a certain value on the table that could be taken or not. What should they be thinking about? So Deepa first.
So I think definitely going back to James's point around alignment, what's that ambition? What does it look like? What's the acquisition strategy or the sales strategy? Who do you want to sell to? So it's just thinking about that, because that will help you then create that roadmap to exit. It will help you identify potential buyers, who, particularly around the question of who would you want to sell to. Alignment within the founders, the leadership teams, the shareholders is really important. And then going back to my point around succession planning, now is the time to really start thinking about that, because when you think of succession planning, it takes a good 2 to 3 years to embed that senior team and that next layer of leadership. So I think some of those things are really important. And then thinking about, what is that growth strategy? Where is growth coming from over the next 3 years to really be able to maximize that sale, the value? So think, it's a combination of things, I think, that to think about, even from a resource people planning perspective, thinking about different markets that you might want to expand into over the next 3 years. How are they going to help your growth? How are they going to help accelerate growth as well? So is it just market expansion? Is it acquiring other businesses in the process before you get to that exit, and to maximize that valuation? So it's really considering all angles, I think, and creating that roadmap to exit.
And I think having that roadmap, when I sold my business a few years ago to some ex-PE guys, I made myself redundant 2 years in advance of the acquisition. And when they kicked the tires pretty hard to find out if I truly was redundant, I was, because I'd put in place someone that was brilliant at running the business, and I became the chairman, and I chaired the board meetings with my non-exec. And when they looked at everything, it's like, you don't appear to be involved directly in the business day to day at all now. So that succession planning, I think, was critical to an exit, because it stopped me from having to be involved in the day to day going forward, and it de-risked it for the buyer, because they knew now that no matter what happened to me, the business was strong and it was capable of running.
Yeah, exactly.
James,
Yeah, I mean,
what's your thoughts?
I would just agree, I agree totally with that, Mike. And I think, we have that conversation with businesses a lot of the time, which is one of the key things they want to do is to be able to not be on a 3-year earnout, not be on a 5-year earnout, actually to be able to step away quite quickly. And then you say, well, if you need to do that, you need to start thinking 2 or 3 years out, because you need to make sure there's no client relationships that are dependent upon you. You're, as you said, you're more of a chairman than you are a CEO. So I think it's really important that businesses, if that's one of your key objectives you want to get from any deal, then you need to think about how you're going to execute that, and also you need to think about that from certain buyer set, because certain buyers, there'll be certain buyers that are happier with that than other buyers, because people buy people a lot of the time in the agency sector.
Absolutely.
And it's much easier if maybe you're a product or a platform business to go, actually, I'm not really that important. But actually, if the business has been built on you and is strongly entrepreneurial and you hold all the relationships and you're the key creative driver, whatever it might be, then it's much more of a risk certainly for, I would say for holding companies to take that attitude.
James and Deepa, thank you ever so much for joining me. It's been really, really interesting, genuinely interesting. I'm sure that our viewers and listeners are going to get a lot from this. Where can people find out more about you?
So we are on www.sherper, so it's SHERPER.group. So they can find us there, or look us up on LinkedIn as well. We're both on LinkedIn.
Brilliant, excellent. Thank you both for your time. It's been amazing. Thank you.
Thank
Really enjoyed
you.
it.
Thanks, Mike.
Mike. Take care.
Cheers. Thank you.